Hello everyone, George DeSantis here with the look at the market for the week ending June 8th, 2018. Let's bring up the disclaimer. I urge you to read it as usual, and we'll get on to looking at some charts. Well, let's begin by looking at the weekly chart of the S&P 500 as we usually do. And we can see we have that ABCD, that old triangle we've been looking at for a while. And we broke above the triangle. Remember my email about the cow jumping over the moon, or the bulls in this case. We broke above the triangle and we jumped over the 2750 resistance level here. This was a resistance level right here, and we jumped above that. So last week's bar found support at the 2750 level, and we have that bullish bar for last week. Also, the parabolic dropped below last week's bar, the most recent bar in other words, and that signals a switch from a downtrend that existed all the way down here to an uptrend. So we do have an uptrend. The other thing we see here is that, as we were discussing last week, is that the 4 EMA is above the 9 is above the 30. We couldn't see it too clearly last week, but there was signs of it here. And now this week, the separation is becoming greater. Separation between the 4, the 9, the 30 moving averages. So we have an uptrend by a number of measures, by the parabolic, as well as the fact that these moving averages are above each other now, and that makes it an uptrend. Now, when we go to the MACD histogram, we see that it's been trending up from below the zero line, which is one of the best times to be buying the market or the index or particular stock. And now, this past week, we got into bullish mode right above the zero line. We're now at 1.6. See that green bar? Now, RSI 12 remains above the 40% line, and on the weekly chart, this is one of the best trend indicators. It broke above the 40% line here and remains above it. Also, Williams percentile, the 30 period that we use, remains above the 50% line, and the sum of the rate of change indicator is above 4%. So all systems are go. We have a bullish uptrend on the weekly chart. Now turn to the daily chart of the S&P 500. And similarly, what we saw last weekend, was that this bar hit the parabolic. If you recall, I mentioned that. We were hitting this parabolic, and I mentioned that what we wanted to see then was parabolic go below the next bar, which it did on Monday, and continue to remain below the recent bars. And right now it sits below the most recent bar, which is Friday's bar. Now, a couple of other things. You can see that the 4 EMA is above the 9 is above the 30. And so by the moving averages, we will say that the trend is up according to the moving averages. One little word of caution here is that we're hitting we are closing, in fact, above the upper Bollinger Band, which is 2 standard deviations. And so won't be surprised to see us doing a little bit of a correction here, a little bit of a consolidation before we go much higher. So we shouldn't expect to keep blazing a trail from here. We are going to probably get a little bit of a correction before we continue higher. You can see that line at 2750 here. We broke above it, as I discussed earlier in the week. MACD histogram continues to trend above the zero line, and all these other indicators are above the key levels. So on the daily chart, likewise, we have an uptrend. You can see parabolic is below, as I think I mentioned before. Let's take a look at some other charts. Here's a chart that we looked at before. It's the spread, the new high, new low spread, the new high, new low index. And remember, last week it was sitting here, and now it was just above the 500 level, and now it's way above it. And if you recall, I mentioned before that my friend Alex Elder believes that this is one of the best leading indicators. It's not a trailing indicator, it's a leading indicator. And the fact that this thing is trending up like this is augurs well for the future, for the bullish scenario. Let's look at a different chart. S&P, we can see that on the daily chart, we have all green bars. Green indicates we are allowed to go long, we are not allowed to go short. So if anything, we should be buying this market and not selling it short. Let's take a look at this chart. This is the McClellan oscillator. It's trending up above the 50 and the 200-day moving average. Another one, which is let's see, yeah, it's the S&P 100, the percentage of these stocks in the S&P 100 above their 200-day moving average. We were sitting at about 55, etc. And I was pointing out that we can trade between 55 and 65. Now we're slightly above 65, at 66%. So that means that we are not just allowed to do some trading, we can hold some positions for the longer term here. MACD, you can see, just crossed above the zero line and moved into bullish territory. So on the S&P 100, percentage of stocks above 200-day moving average is now in bullish, very bullish territory. We can look at another one. Well, let's see. We want to look at best choice. On best choice, we have the S&P being at 93.6%. So it won't be surprising to see it pull back a little bit from there, because we are now in that area of what we would call an overbought area. And you see when it gets there, it tends to pull back. Not that it has to go all the way down like that, but when it gets to the 90% level, it tends to pull back. See? So don't be surprised to see a little bit of a consolidation from here. Let's take a look at some individual stocks and some ETFs as well. I came across a couple of ETFs that I'd like to point out to you. This one is the First Trust Dow Jones Internet Index Fund. It's an ETF, internet stocks, and I figured that it's up 24% since January 3rd. So you might want to take a note of that. FDN is a symbol. It looks pretty bullish. It's a weekly chart. In case we don't want to buy a particular stock, or there are some people who are more long-term in terms of their view of the market. Hey, 24% since January is not a bad move. And it looks pretty bullish here. Let's take a look at another one, PSJ. PSJ is up 20% since January 3rd. And that one is PowerShares Dynamic Software Portfolio. And another one was XWeb, XWEB. And that one was up 29% since the early January. And another one was PSCT. I don't recall how it performed, but it was up 9%. So it's not burning the house down, but these are some ETFs I wanted to include today and have a look at. So let's continue with some individual stocks from the April 13 shopping list that I sent you, and I work off of it. You can see that Align Technology continues to run up significantly. I mean, we had a target of 330 from this triangle here, but it long since surpassed that as at 346. And it's still seemingly, continuing to go higher. I don't own it right now. Let's take a look at Microsoft. Microsoft I own. We have a target of 103.34 from this triangle, and it continues to trend higher. There's a lot of good news on Microsoft, I think, I've heard. And all of these indicators are above the critical levels, the 4% line here, the 50% line, the 60%. So I like Microsoft. We'll see how much this continues. We'll take a look at it. Here's Apple. Don't own Apple right now. Perhaps I should. But in any case, had a nice bullish bar here. This is a weekly chart. Since then, it's been sort of consolidating here. It's a bit overbought, and so it might consolidate for a while. But Apple is one of those stocks that just keeps trudging along. Here's a weekly chart of MasterCard, one of those stocks that I love very much, the payment systems. Not all the payment systems, but especially Visa and MasterCard. And we could probably include Green Dot there too. But MasterCard has just been a steady performer, and I like it very much. I don't own it right now. I had Visa. I own Visa instead. Here's IDEX Laboratories, IDXX. I own this one. I have a target of 224. It's a 219.72. This is a company that makes diagnostic and research equipment for the veterinarian business. So the vets use their diagnostic equipment, etc. And apparently it's one of those stocks that are growing significantly. So I own some of it. Here's a weekly of NVIDIA. This company just keeps trudging along. It just keeps coming out with more and more good news. Recently, there's news about it providing chips for IBM with this new supercomputer that is the fastest now in the world. And it just keeps moving. I don't own it right now, but boy, is that a workhorse. Here's the ETF XLK. As I mentioned last week, I used to own this last year for a long time, made quite a bit of money with it. It had a triangle here, and I have a target of 75.43 from the triangle, and it's trending up nicely. So I own it again. I bought some back here, somewhere in here. So I own it again. Here's Netflix, weekly chart. Netflix keeps, trucking along, man. The triangle here broke out above it, hitting the upper Bollinger Band, probably going into a squeeze. But this company just keeps moving, man. Right now, I'm a little concerned about the possibility of a bearish divergence of MACD developing here. We'll wait and see how that develops, if it does at all. Here's Visa. How many times can I say I love the stock? I own quite a bit of it. Had a nice week again last week, and all these indicators look very bullish here to me. Here's Costco weekly chart. Nice bullish bar here last week, and I want to show you the daily, because on the daily last week I saw this bearish divergence some couple of weeks ago actually. And it played that out because it did pull back. The bearish divergence did materialize in a pullback, but since then it's been moving up again. So that's interesting. That's very bullish. Here's the weekly chart of CRISPR. As you know, I sold half of what I had. I had a tremendous gain in it. But what I'm seeing here on the weekly chart is we have a target of $80.80. That's a pretty far away from here. However, there is a triangle. We'll see it on the daily chart. We have this inside bar, or what we might refer to as a bullish harami here. And so this is looking as though it might be getting ready to break out again. Let's look at the daily chart. On the daily chart, you could see that from this triangle here, it's closing above the triangle now. So that's encouraging. That should take us a little higher. Here's a weekly chart of Adobe. It's one that I own. I have quite a few shares. Done very, very well for me. You can see on the weekly chart, it just keeps going up. Now on the daily chart, it pulled back a little bit here. But then on Friday, we had a nice bullish bar here. So I'm holding it. Here's Etsy. My friend Laura recommended it a while ago. I traded it, made money with it, but don't own it at the present time. She has held on to it all the way up and made some nice returns on it. It's also recommended by Zacks. We have to end here. Have a wonderful weekend. I hope you did. We'll talk again next week.